America officially declared independence from Great Britain on July 4th, 1776, and defeated the Redcoats by 1883. After continued British antagonization, the US invaded Canada in the War of 1812, but this resulted in a white peace. 30 years later, America crushed Mexico but took far less land than many desired. In 1861, the South seceded, but the Union put down the Dixies by 1865, with the federal government standing as the unchallenged power in the nation, abolishing slavery. Settlers pushed west, and eventually, America stood from sea to shining sea. By the end of the 19th century, we completely abandoned the Founding Fathers' belief in isolation, annexing Hawaii, going to war with Spain, and taking the Philippines and other foreign possessions. Finally, we completely cut the facade of neutrality, entering World War I on the side of the Entente, losing over 100,000 Americans in a foreign conflict. When our economy collapsed during the Great Depression, we dragged Europe down, leading to the rise of the National Socialists in Germany. America recovered by entering and winning World War II, but in doing so, we empowered the Soviet Union to control half of Europe. NATO was established to curtail the Soviets, and we decided to combat communism directly, intervening in Korea and Vietnam, losing millions of Americans, while the Soviets funded communist insurgencies all over the globe. Things at home were supposed to have improved after World War II, but racism was still rampant over much of the nation, and these wouldn't be legally fixed until the 70s, while many industrial jobs were shipped overseas. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1992, America had a chance to fully realize a peaceful West, but it didn't take it, instead choosing to remain the sole global hegemon, a position that may soon change. America is by no means perfect, but it's the best nation on Earth today. However, let's explore a better path for the United States. So join me, the over 30,000 patriots, and the 90% who haven't subscribed yet. This video will cover 250 years of American history, from the Revolution through to the 21st century, and follow an idealistic Madisonian-Jeffersonian timeline. So if you have any questions or disagree with me, leave a comment and I'll reply. Check out my Patreon or channel membership for the maps and sources from the video. History was forever changed in 1776, as American privateers don't attack Nova Scotian villages and shipping, convincing them to join as a 14th colony. Everything else plays out similarly, defeating the Redcoats by 1783, with Britain recognizing the 14 colonies' independence, and ceding almost all territories west of the Mississippi and south of the Great Lakes to America. This meant the US flag will have 14 stripes instead of 13. In 1803, President Thomas Jefferson oversaw the Louisiana Purchase from France, expanding America, and after the American victory in the First Barbary War, Jefferson decided to create a standing army. Throughout the Napoleonic Wars, Britain was impressing American soldiers into their navy, blockading trade with France through orders in council, and sending weapons to Tecumseh to slaughter Americans. These actions culminated in the War of 1812. Here, Madison cut special trade agreements with the Northeast and promised expansion for the states up to the St. Lawrence River, gaining their militias, allowing America to better utilize their 16-to-1 population advantage. Nova Scotia allowed the US to choke out the St. Lawrence River, cutting Canada off from the rest of the British Empire. By July 1813, the war was over, as Britain was focused on the War of the Sixth Coalition, destroying Napoleon. Their population cared more about the Corsican than the distant colonial losses. The combination of better leadership, a professional army, and more troops enabled the American victory. Britain paid the US $20 million and ceded all continental North American land, as many loyalists fled to Australia. Jefferson's Francophile attitude became the norm in the States. James Monroe followed Madison, ushering in the era of good feelings, with the federal government remaining small, favoring states' rights. The Treaty of Adams-Onis was signed with Spain over Florida and the Missouri Territory. American settlers moved into deserted land in Canada, fading the Canadian spirit, and calls for statehood began. Balance between free and slave states was necessary for national unity, so Upper Canada, now known as Washington, Lower Canada, now known as Canada, and Newfoundland were all admitted into the Union, Rupert's Land, parts of old Upper Canada, and Labrador all remained territories. Northern lands alleviated pressure to resettle the natives, as acculturation was working, so the Indian Removal Act failed to pass. In the 1830s, the Supreme Court ruled that private property rights were extended to natives who assimilated to American practices of Christianity, monogamy, ways of dress, and spoke English, granting them the right to naturalize as American citizens. So the 5 civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Cree, and Seminoles, kept their lands. Some tribes, such as the Seminoles, even would eventually become their own states, although white settlers could buy properties in them. The legal precedent was set, meaning many tribes wouldn't be forced to migrate, but become full Americans in time. Less southern lands led to Texas' request of admission in 1837 being accepted, provoking an earlier Mexican-American War in 1840, while the republics of the Rio Grande and Yucatan were rebelling from Santa Anna's dictatorial rule. With Texas part of the Union, these breakaway republics requested American aid. American armies rolled through the disheveled Mexican forces quickly, taking Mexico City in under a year, unsure of how to proceed. After winning in a few months, calls to annex Mexico propagated, especially in the South, hoping to include the new territories as slave states. Many senators saw the economic benefits of the new lands and rich resources. A policy of indefinite occupation was established, with a permanent occupation force of 20,000 soldiers. Washington circumspectly resigned to annex all of Mexico. Guerrilla campaigns were crushed as bits and pieces were added to the Union as slave states over time. However, despite pressure from Southern slave owners, in the years ensuing the conflict, slavery failed to boom because of resistance from the locals and poor climate for cash crops slavery relied upon. Enmity rose between the North and South, exploding over Kansas. When the territory was first established, a vote would decide if it would join as a free or slave state, triggering the Bleeding Kansas massacres between slavers and abolitionists. In May 1856, John Brown, a radical abolitionist, and his son butchered 5 pro-slavery men. D.C. timidly reprimanded the slaughter, appalling the South, causing some southern states to secede from the Union, viewing this as a federal endorsement of John Brown. Tennessee and Virginia don't join the Dixies here, so West Virginia isn't formed. The quick schism caught the Union off guard, losing the first few battles, similar to Bull Run. Mexico was still under occupation, but 7,000 troops abandoned their posts to fight for the South, leaving Mexico with 3 factions: the Unionists, Separatists, and Neutrals. D.C. struck a deal with northern populated territories, promising to grant them statehood after the war in exchange for support. In response, 2 large Mexican-American armies were formed, not all that different from the roughly 200,000 first-generation German Americans who've historically fought for the Union. The separatist groups in the South renewed their efforts to free themselves from America, while most Mexicans fearfully waited. The 2 Mexican-American armies swept through Texas, linking up with other Union forces, ending the rebellion in 9 months as the South was unprepared for the war. Thankfully, far fewer people died here, and the South was not devastated by the grueling conflict. Once the Southerners were brought back in line, Union forces marched south and destroyed the last bastion of Mexican independence by 1861. The separatist leaders were killed here. To a Yankee, a white Southerner was more reconcilable than a brown Mexican who only spoke Spanish. Promised territories were soon admitted into the Union after the war, as the idea of Mexico began to fade, just as Canada did. After the war, an amendment to legalize slavery, while most rebel leaders received light sentences to ease tension. Despite rebelling, Southern property rights were still sacrosanct. D.C. did not have the power to strip their lands. Instead, huge land grants out west and federal land were given to freed slaves, giving them a greater degree of economic independence and distancing themselves from former slave owners, fully liberating them from Southern oppression. The federal government acted as a policing force in the South, providing safe passage to over 2.5 million freed slaves, while ensuring the rights of former slaves were respected in the South by building new military bases and outposts over the Dixie states. This ensured Jim Crow laws never came to pass, allowing black politicians to represent their constituencies. Importantly, the war was of too short a duration to drastically reshape the balance between the state and federal governments. Territorial purchases became the new objective to expand the Union, as the slave-free balance was no longer. Alaska was bought from Russia in 1867. It was unprofitable for Russia, and they received American recognition of their claim to Hawaii, which would later become a Russian colony. After hard negotiations with Denmark, America went through with the purchases of Greenland, Iceland, and the Danish West Indies in 1868. The Dominican Republic was acquired in 1870, and British Honduras in 1875. More American land meant fewer Europeans migrated to South America, choosing the States instead. Many Northern Europeans still ended up west of the Great Lakes, creating large German and Nordic diasporas. The biggest change was the Italians, who chose to migrate south, where there was less anti-Catholic bias than on the East Coast, resulting in the largest Italian diaspora along the Gulf Coast. The demographic melange meant the Chinese Exclusion Act was never passed, causing railways to be generally more privatized. Despite numerous peaceful tribes Americanizing and retaining their lands, countless chose to fight the settlers and were pushed off into reservations before being fully assimilated into American society. Modernization was more divided by states, with the most industrialized regions being the Steel Belt along the Gulf Coast, the West Coast, and alongside the Mississippi and Rio Grande rivers. Multiple gold rushes all over the nation in California, Alaska, the Yukon, and around Hudson Bay spurred the economy in those areas. Ties between America and Colombia were strengthened, as the states began to view Colombia as their southern sister. They shared common ties of republicanism, overthrowing their colonial overlords, and Colombia was a decentralized republic of multiple states, officially the United States of Colombia. Increased trade and support led the Colombian peso to be backed in the American dollar, as Colombia became the most stable and safe nation in South America. America's largest trade partner, though, was France. While relations with Britain were normalized since the War of 1812, France was seen in a better light, so strengthened economic ties meant they never left Egypt, retaining control over the Suez. By the 1880s, Mexico was fully pacified as multiple generations had been born and raised in the Union, embracing American ideals and culture. Worry over Hispanic culture led to English becoming the official language of America, so all government documents, ballots, street signs, etc. were in English. Mexican Americans began pushing for further conquest into Central America and got their chance during Barrios' War of Reunification in the 1880s. Central America was blockaded, while the army marched through to protect American economic interests, installing friendly governments who sold themselves to the Union as the Dominican Republic did, becoming territories. Colombia conquered Costa Rica in the 1890s. The real reason for the conquest was American industrialists' plans for a canal across Nicaragua, similar to the Suez Canal. The pan-Latinism sentiments rose after the conquest, and war with Spain was inevitable. For Mexican Americans, the Spanish-American War was similar to the War of 1812, being seen as a final expulsion of their colonial overlords from North America. The war was justified by the Monroe Doctrine, and Spain quickly lost, only fighting to prevent a domestic civil war. Puerto Rico and Cuba were annexed, while the Spanish Pacific colonies were all sold to France. As America didn't control Hawaii, they had no interest in Asia. Florida wouldn't develop a large Latino population, as Cuba was part of America. The rapid expansion gave the Union an area of roughly 9.4 million square miles, or 24 million square kilometers, becoming the largest nation in the world. By 1905, the Nicaraguan Canal was operational and extremely profitable, while Nicaragua was admitted as a state, becoming one of the richest regions on the globe. Territorial expansion was ended as America entered a period of unbridled isolation. Assuming things play out similarly in Europe, which is highly unlikely, the scramble for Africa would be altered, with France taking Egypt while Britain and Germany squabbled over Central Africa, with Africa looking something like this by 1910. At the outbreak of the Great War, America had no interest in joining, never attempting to spread democracy abroad. getting extremely wealthy trading with both sides, as neither dared to detain American trading vessels, fearing it would draw them into the war on the opposing side, enabling dominant trade relations for the Union. Total neutrality allowed millions of German Americans to retain their culture and language throughout the war. The strengthened French and Entente were more than capable of holding in the West, while the Central Powers ended up victorious in the East, although Austria-Hungary proved more valuable, annexing Poland as a third kingdom, preventing total German domination of Central and Eastern Europe. Peace eventually arrived. France received Alsace and Lorraine, Central Powers' Eastern changes were recognized, and colonial holdings were smoothed out. In time, the German-backed all-Russian government defeated the Bolsheviks, ending communism. It's impossible to know what Europe would look like after this, but ideally, more wars like the Austro-Prussian War would create continual immigration from Europe to America, so European doctors, lawyers, engineers, craftsmen, etc. would flee to America to avoid the constant wars. Additionally, the timeline for decolonization is impossible to predict. Balance between state and federal governments generally favor the states, with many Americans having more loyalty to their state than the federal government. This kept America relatively decentralized, with greater regionalism as specific trade blocs formed between states, forestalling national corporations' existence as states had wildly different laws and regulations. Federally, everything was laissez-faire, leading to wages greatly surpassing Europe, just as historically. The weaker federal government meant the Federal Reserve never existed, and non-involvement in the Great War prevented income tax. Foreign policy would entirely center on trade relations and maintaining neutrality in global conflicts. There wouldn't likely be a high of the Roaring Twenties, but a crash like the Great Depression is equally unlikely, keeping the government's hands out of the market. Throughout the 20th century, infrastructure was built, helping connect the nation and grow the economy, increasing interstate trade. The low regulations meant jobs were never shipped overseas, so the Steel Belt and cities like Detroit and Pittsburgh stayed extremely wealthy. Infrastructure projects such as Cincinnati's subway system were built in most major cities to attract homeowners, leading cities to develop and modernize, trying to stay ahead of their competition. The Prohibition never federally existed, so mobs failed to rise in power in the early 20s, keeping cities far safer. The 17th Amendment never passed here, meaning direct election of senators doesn't occur, keeping the Founding Fathers' vision true for the Senate. A cap for Congress also wasn't established, as a vastly growing population meant no one wanted the Congress to end up as a bigger version of the Senate. It's impossible to know if more parties developed because of potential changes in legislation and amendments, or if separate caucuses existed within parties. Specific regional identities would likely form, such as Quebec, a Nordic party, Cubans, several Mexican groups, Native American groups, Central Americans, etc. These would all be somewhat similar to the CSU in Germany today, representing Bavaria. America would be far more regionalized and multilingual between English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, native languages, Nordic languages, and Polish, with nearly 65% of Americans being multilingual, while 90% of Americans could speak English. The civil rights movement would be more so for Latinos and blacks, as Jim Crow laws never rose in the South because of the longer federal occupation, and many hate groups like the KKK that targeted blacks, Jews, or Catholics never became prominent due to the increased ethnic and religious diversity. By the 1950s, America was fully desegregated, as states with no racial barriers were reaping the economic rewards, proving the archaic and racist laws a hindrance. Segregationist states had no choice but to remove the laws or fall far behind other states, becoming economically destitute. Without the rise of communism and brutalist architecture, the ornamental style of the early 20th century continued, meaning American cities never cannibalized themselves, remaining unique and beautiful, fostering closer kinship and respect for the cities Americans lived in. Numerous cities, such as Kansas City, Buffalo, and St. Louis, preserved their gorgeous buildings. Without involvement in any foreign wars and retaining a spotless record in battle, Americans would be exceedingly patriotic, bordering on chauvinistic. The states had never been devastated, especially when compared with the constant destruction in Europe. They were the largest economy in the world by far, and were superior to Europe in many regards, leaving their population much more self-assured and brash. The United States dominated the Atlantic and had no real enemies, was on great terms with a stable and strong southern neighbor in Colombia, had no religious or racial discrimination, was the strongest power in human history, and had a population of nearly 600 million people by the turn of the new millennium, all while following the guidelines of the Founding Fathers. God truly had blessed America. If you liked this, check out my video focusing specifically on an American victory in the War of 1812. If you liked what you saw, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Goodbye.